Great, take it away. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about what people say in their profile biographies. Specifically on Twitter, how do they describe themselves? That's the task in front of them. And I get very interested in that. So the tools that I'm about to describe to you, I'll walk you through using. This is my James Webb Space Telescope, right? It's the Jason Jeffrey Jones People on Twitter telescope, if you will. So let me talk you through it. This you might see here is how I'm represented on Twitter. This is what you would see if you went to my Twitter profile right now. It's a picture of me. There's a deliberately chosen background of time series coming out of my head, right? My name, my Twitter handle, where I'm at, link to my website. And what I'm going to talk about today, there's this brief text where I was asked to describe myself in 160 characters or less, which is a daunting task, but I did it. And probably many of you have done that too. So I'm going to call this the bio, or you might hear me say profile bio because it's part of the profile. There are these kinds of bios on many sites. Twitter is where the most people are, where the data is the most accessible. And so I'm going to focus exclusively on Twitter as my analysis has so far. All right, so as I talk, please feel free to load up the chat with questions. I will check in, and I'm happy to have interruptions and questions because it'll help fill the time. I deliberately shortened up everything so that we have plenty of time to talk about this as you'd like. Okay, so let me switch to one more document here. Give you a quick outline what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to keep going through that slide deck to give you an orientation to what I'm doing, because it is probably new to you. We'll talk about personally expressed identity. I'll define that. We'll talk about longitudinal online profile sampling. This is a method that I want you to adopt. I'm trying to make it easy for other people to adopt and use. And we'll go through all the steps of that. All of that work is to get us to the point where we understand the data set I want to show you today. So this is a publicly available data set. It's on the Open Science Framework. It is a brief set of time, 2015 through 2020, and it's US Twitter users. I'm working on this summer expanding that to more countries, more languages, and a longer series of time. So right now you can get the US 2015 to 2020 data. We'll walk through that, I'll explain it, and then we'll draw some pictures. We'll visualize a few of the time series that are in that data set. And I hope that'll give you a sense of the power of what you could do with this. These are just a few off the top of my head examples of what you might do. So some orientation, we'll download the data. You can feel free to work ahead or work with me as we're doing this, and then visualize it. So let's skip ahead again. This is where we want to get to. We want to get to a place where we're looking at pictures like this. These are our time series. They're daily estimates of the proportion of active Twitter users. So that is US Twitter users who are tweeting today. The values here are showing you a proportion of those that have each one of these tokens in their bio. So what do I mean by token? So I'm calling these tokens because they're not all words, but I think about them as words. Because some of these are abbreviations, hashtags, linguistic tokens. On the y-axis, you're looking at prevalence. So these proportions are small, they have to be, right? You can't use every word to describe yourself. You only have 160 characters. Most people do not use most words. These numbers are small. So we multiply by 10,000 to get a whole number, a reasonable number to look at, so we don't have to think about decimals. I'm showing you daily estimates over time, time on the x-axis. If you just found a randomly active US Twitter user, what is the chance that could be on the y-axis? What's the chance that they have one of these tokens in their profile? And there's nothing to do with tweets. I'm not going to touch any text in any tweets this whole talk. There's no tweet data here, just profile bio data. All right, so what do you see here? You see here that we can contrast the relative size, the relative popularity of the use of different tokens within bios. You see a lot of things happening here. You can see that BLM and Black Lives Matter, they seem to appear in US Twitter users' bios right after the killing of Philandro Castile in July of 2016, and then again, to a larger extent, after the killing of George Floyd, Memorial Day weekend of 2020. So you can see people's profiles reacting in real time to those events. Now, there are also counter movements, counter hashtags, back the blue, Blue Lives Matter, that respond to the same events, it appears, and just not as strongly. So that's interesting. I want to get you there to where you can be doing this kind of analysis yourself. Just as one more illustration before we get into it, this is a summer project. This summer, I have an undergraduate REU who's working on looking at use of the Ukraine flag emoji within US Twitter users' profile bios over time in 2022. And you can see there's a period of rapid growth here that responds to the Russian invasion. I'll just deal with this question quickly. Have I been downloading this data periodically? Yes. So almost all of what you will see today is based on collecting the 1% stream of tweets. Now, we have other processes that look at profiles and sample profiles from time to time. But one of the nice things about the 1% sample of tweets is that every tweet has a real-time profile attached to it. So whatever your bio was at the time you tweeted, it's right there in the 1% sample. All right, so you see Ukraine pops up right around the event and then holds steady at a prevalence of about 30 per 10,000. The Ukraine flag has started the year tied for last, if you will, among flags in US Twitter users' bios. There's about 70 flags that are used almost never, very rarely, within US users' bios. And Ukraine was down there until the Russian invasion, and then it has since increased to be the third most popular flag emoji within users' bios. Zooming out to give you some context, look at panel C here. We're looking annually, just like the data I'm going to show you today, annually in US Twitter users' bios, the proportion, is the prevalence that are using any emoji has increased from less than 10% to more than 25%. And using flag emojis, it's still about 5%. All right, so how did I get here? I'll just bring you along the process with me. So I got here by staring at Twitter profile pages, which maybe you have done. Maybe you've spent some time doing that. They're fascinating. Right? We are spending time constructing our own identities online, on Twitter and a bunch of other places. And I just like to stare at Twitter profile pages and see what people do. And you can see, let me contrast two profile pages for you. There's a president and here's another president. A president and another president. This is a defunct profile now, but two presidents depicting themselves in very different ways. What about this guy? He's always smiling, right? He's Mr. Smiley, not this guy, right? This guy, he's connecting one-on-one with the youth. Right? This is not about connecting one-on-one. This is about either emerging from or fading into the crowd. Right? I think these are deliberate choices, maybe not conscious choices, but deliberate choices. But I can't sit around and stare at profiles and psychoanalyze pictures all the time. I've got to do something productive with my time. And so what I've chosen to do is look at bios. That is the text, the self-descriptive text that people are asked to put in their profile. Now, Barack Obama's profile is perfect because it's already analyzed for me. What is it? It's a comma-separated list of social roles, right? And a lot of people do this. They'll just give you a comma-separated list of categories that they fall into. So I think that if you want to study identity, then Twitter data is the best data that has ever existed, the best data by a million miles that you could actually get your hands on. Now, it has this drawback. I always have people ask the question of, well, but that's not who I really am, right? And so I can't measure that with Twitter data. I can't measure 2 a.m., you're laying in your bed by yourself, really getting to the core of it. And who are you really? I don't know. And to a large extent, I personally don't care who you are really. I think it's more interesting to say, who do you present to the world? Who do you say that you are? And that's what I study. So it's a personally expressed identity. You are describing yourself and you're saying it out loud in a place where other people might hear you. Personally expressed identity. Now on Twitter, like I said, there is this one field. It's called the user description field internally. I call it the bio, and it is millions of people's response to this prompt. Describe yourself in 160 characters or less. That's what the prompt used to be. It's gotten a little different over the years. We can look up the exact text today if we wanted to. I think there's a lot of face validity in doing this. What is the one thing you know about Al Yankovic? He is weird, and that's how he describes himself on Twitter. Tom Hanks is an actor. Malalia is an advocate for girls. It's right here. Right? It's right here on their Twitter profiles. Of course, there is missing information. What is the one thing you know about Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson? Well, these are conservatives, right? They're Republican, they're fans of Trump. They don't say any of these things in their profile. So there are things that you might like to know about someone that they aren't expressing out loud. You just have to deal with it. Tom Brady is a football guy. Greta Thunberg, she's a climate activist. We see people describe themselves in useful ways. There's a lot of signal in this data. I'm trying to convince you. People just like to do these comma-separated lists of roles that they fill. Actor, director, producer, wife, Mamala, auntie, you know, Hillary Clinton is a superstar here. So you might be thinking you can't measure things this way. Seems too easy. Doesn't seem like the way that we do things, right? We have to bring people into the lab, read them a long consent form and poke and prod them until they tell us who they really are. But I will show you that this Twitter prompt, describe yourself in 160 characters or less, it's not that different from state-of-the-art social science. How do you get people to describe themselves? I would say that if you were going to do this in a traditional way right now, you'd use something like the 20 statements test. 20 statements test is one of many who am I instruments. Pencil and paper, ask someone, please describe yourself, and they write it down. You go off and code it somehow and turn that into data. People are still 21 using this scale. And the problem with this scale is it doesn't scale, right? It doesn't scale to 1 million. You'll never get 1 million. You'll never get 1 million responses this way, no matter what research funding you get. And you certainly won't get 200,000 different responses every single day just pouring into your servers the way that you can with Twitter data. Okay, so I want to teach you to do longitudinal online profile sampling, or LOPS. It's just what it sounds like. You're sampling profiles longitudinally. So over time, the same users look at their profile, and specifically we're interested in the bios. That's self-descriptive text, how they describe themselves. And just collecting that over time. If you monitor the streaming endpoint, the random sample stream on the Twitter API, then you get this for free. Every hour, you'll see about 20,000 tweets. So let me break this down for you, show you some of the details. And again, if you have questions here, I'm happy to take questions about the details. There's a few steps once you want to look at profiles over time. You first need to know what's your population. What population are you interested in? I tend to keep these populations very broad. So there is the global population of Twitter, which is what you get from a 1% stream. And because I am American and only understand English and only understand America, I filter that global stream down to American users. It's just easier for me to work with, but all that other data is there. So define a population, collect their bios or their profiles over time, tokenize them, and compute prevalence. Let's look at each one of those steps. So like I said, the data I'm going to share with you today, it's from US users of Twitter. That is defined as in their location field, which is free response field. You can type whatever you want. You're asked for location. Some people say they're over the rainbow, and we just have to give up on them. Some people say they're in hell. They're not in our sample either. But if they say something like USA or Texas or something, comma, OH, and we're pretty sure they're in Ohio, then we say these are users from the United States. If you use those heuristics to look for US users, you get about 10 million US users each year. And about 200,000 of them are active each day at a different 200,000. Collecting these over time is where you have to do a little bit of engineering. So I'm using the 1% stream, which I've been monitoring since 2015 and continuing to the present. Right? There's more of these tweets filing into the servers as we speak. You can also use endpoints in the REST API to go out and manually grab profiles and look at this same kind of data, the bios. All of these are publicly available. The data that you get from the API, it's publicly available. You can't hide your profile on Twitter. You can hide your tweets or protect your tweets, it's called, but you can't protect your profile. Just as a point of interest, the median time between profile edits is 150 days. So you might expect for the median user to see 2 edits per year. Now, instead of dealing with the whole text and trying to code it in some way, or there are different projects that one might do with some machine learning NLP on the full text. What I'm focused on in my lab is looking at token prevalence over time. So we tokenize the bios, that is, just split them up into tokens, things that look like words. And I think of these as elements of identity. You chose this symbol to be part of yourself, and that means something, and that's something we want to measure. Now, the dependent measure of interest for me is prevalence. As a proportion of all the users we can observe, how many of them are using this word? So it gives us a measure of popularity. And it doesn't depend necessarily on how many times you use the word, or it doesn't depend on how often you tweet. It's some estimate of the proportion of active users who have this word, this token in their bio. Okay, one more thing to think about before we move into the fun stuff is that there's always two ways to collect social science data. You can collect it cross-sectionally over time or longitudinally over time. And I do both, and I encourage you to do both because it tells you two different things. When you look cross-sectionally over time, you see who's active at any one moment, who's visible, who is coming out today. When you look longitudinally, that is, you're observing the same users over time, and you keep the population the same over time in your analyses. Now you can make strong claims about individual changes. That in this population, if I see the prevalence go up, it's the same people over time. So on net, more individuals are adding this word than are deleting this word. So you can make claims about both, observations about both. How's the population of active Twitter users changing? And how are individuals who are part of that population editing their own bios? And both of these are available to you at this URL and in the data set we're going to look at in just a few minutes. So let me take a look at the time, plenty of time, and show you a few examples. So I've been looking at the words people use to describe themselves in these bios over time in US Twitter users, and some things that we've observed. The big one that we've observed is that people are using political words more often to describe themselves. Words like conservative or progressive, specifically Trump and MAGA during this time period were growing. very quickly in popularity. And that comes at the expense of other identities. Right? Sports and arts, having the word basketball is still much, a user is much more likely to have the word basketball than the word conservative. But in relative terms, that's decreasing over time. And specifically, you can use the same data to really zero in. And so here are two specific words, and you can see their differing trends over time and the crossover that happened in 2020. So if you were looking at a random active US Twitter user in each of these years, for most of the years, they'd be more likely to have the word Jesus in their bio than the word Trump, but that flipped in 2020. I'm showing you cross-sectional. Who's active on Twitter? What is the active population like? Let's look at one example of a longitudinal sample, where we're looking at the same 1.5 million users for these 6 years. It shouldn't surprise you that as our Twitter users get older, they're more likely to use words describing parents to describe themselves. And there's a lot you can take away from this graph, that there are, let's see, more fathers than dads, but more moms than mothers on Twitter. Mother is not popular, and the other ways of describing yourself as a parent are increasing in popularity over time. Presumably, as these users age, they think of themselves more as a parent, and more of them are becoming parents. So this example comes from a website that I want to show you. Let's go to this website right now. All right. So I'm going to show you where to download this data and how to use it in R if you wanted to, but you don't have to go there first. If you just want to explore, you can come to this website, and it works just like Google, or just like Google Trends works. You can type in words and see their relative popularity over time. So let's, we could look at some cryptocurrency words, right? BTC, that's Bitcoin, ETH, that's other, and then those things spelled out. So no crash happening yet here. This data ends at 2020. You can see this is becoming more popular in US Twitter users' bios, their description of themselves. You can choose either the cross-sectional sample or the longitudinal sample. The thing you can imagine typing here, right? Let's look at some AFC North. Browns, Ravens, Steelers, Bengals. All right, Steelers dominating here, the way they have in the division, probably. Till recently. Browns surprisingly popular. Cross-sectionally, we'll see if we get a different result. Still Steelers doing very well. Browns picking up in recent years as they've moved from a terrible team to a playoff team, and then back to a question mark team. We'll see what they do this year. Okay, so the website is there. I'm working on updating the website. The website will soon go back to 2010 and forward through 2022. But right now, you can get a sense for what was happening, relative prevalences of 15,000 different words and tokens. This paper, open access, will describe what I've described to you, just in a little bit longer form, and show you some kind of summary statistics of what these kinds of prevalences look like. So in summary, we are constructing our identities online. I'm very interested in that process, the choices we make, and I want to make that kind of data, these kinds of series, as accessible as possible. So you've got the website. The website will add features over time. And then what we're going to drill down on today is if you want to just grab the raw data and play with it yourself, you can do that too. All the data behind the website is available for download. So let's do that next. Put that in the background. So if you want to follow along at home, I'm going to just run through these steps here that I put in front of you. So you can go to the Open Science Framework. And find this data set. The data set is this file right here. It's a CSV. It has a long name. And it's telling you what it is. It's saying per each token, per each linguistic token, I will show you the user prevalence. And where does it come from? It comes from one bio per user per year. So we have annual resolution in this data file. That makes it nice and compact. This is only going to be 5 megabytes. I've shown you daily resolution, which is pretty neat to work with and pretty useful, but you know, you're going to get data on the size of gigabytes, which is still very reasonable to work with. But for right now, what's available is the annual resolution data. 1 bio per user per year means that what I've done is from all of the many observations of the many users, for each year, for each user, just choose one at random. So here is your March 9th bio, and that is you for the year. Even though I have more data, we're just deliberately downsampling now to get this annual resolution data, and we don't want to choose the first bio we see or the last bio we see or the longest bio we see. We just randomly choose one bio, and that's you for the year, no matter how many edits you make. All right, so you can download this file. I've already downloaded it before, but I'll download it again. It's 5 megabytes. It's a CSV file. You can open it up in Excel. Excel won't show you, at least my Windows Excel won't show you the emojis appropriately. You can open it in a text editor. You can open it in anything that'll work with a CSV. There's a README file, there's a text file that will explain the structure of the file. And then I want to take you through this, this R script. Oops. Let's not click on it. Let's download it. Yeah, this is here too, but we'll just replace it. Work from scratch here. All right, so what I didn't tell you, and I apologize for that, is that I'm gonna go through this in RStudio. I've got tidyverse installed, and it's going to depend on tidyverse, the script working. But that's probably not too uncommon a setup for those of us here. This is Control plus. Okay, this is probably rather readable for you. So let's go ahead and load this file. I'll show you the structure of it. It's pretty straightforward. I tried to keep it as understandable as possible. You have a column that has tokens in it. So these are exclamation points, all the different number of exclamation points that people use in their bios. The year in which we're measuring these other things. So in 2015, the prevalence of a single exclamation point was 835. And the prevalence is the incidence divided by the total accounts times 10,000, and then rounded to an integer. So before the pandemic, I had to explain this more frequently. I think we are probably all too familiar now with incidence in the population and how that translates to prevalence. I like to focus on prevalence because now we've normalized over years. We have different numbers of users who are observed. Incidence, these numbers can get large and hard to think about, but prevalence is usually pretty straightforward. And you can compare apples to apples this way. If this token has a higher prevalence than this token, more users are using that in their bio. This last column is telling you what type of sample this data is for. There are two samples. There's a cross-sectional sample, which is larger. Everyone who happens to be active at least once in that year. And then there's the longitudinal sample, which is the intersection of all of the different years. So you have to have been present in each and every year, 2015 through 2020, to get into the longitudinal sample. That's nice because these are the users that we have 6 full years of data for. And we can look at individual change over time. Which words did they add, remove, replace, and those kinds of questions. Okay, so you can do a little bit in the RStudio GUI here to filter. You might want to look at MAGA, right? MAGA. You get MAGA tokens. So you can see that these increased over time. Keep in your head. Well, let's look at, you can say Trump. Let's look for clean Trump. Trump in 2020, prevalence of 72. You can guess in your mind what it will be for Biden, and we'll go look. Biden or Joe Biden. 4, 1, 3. Here's a 7 in the cross-sectional. All right, just to say, you can filter, look at this very quickly here in RStudio. You can do the same thing in Excel. Once we start using the code in our file, we can see what's in there. You can see Well, how many observations do we have per year? About 30,000, but split that in half. Because we've got the two different samples, cross-sectional and longitudinal. So there's about 15,000 tokens with data each year. There are many, 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 many more tokens in people's bios, but I've cut off the long tail here of low frequency tokens. Half and half tokens in the cross-sectional and the longitudinal samples. And you can keep looking at this sample if you just want to look at the types of things you might find. So tokens that are in there: waste, silly, spiritual, appellate, someone's an appellate judge, one assumes, winter, M&M, pitcher, intellectual, all kinds of things. I think I have something in here that I want to show you. All right, yeah. One thing we can do is just sample rows. If you look at, here's just 5 random rows. Not ordered in any way, not grouped by any way, 5 random rows from this data frame. What was this first one telling you? It's saying, for the token wife, in the year 2015, the prevalence was 131 in the longitudinal sample. So that, in that year, the longitudinal sample had 1.3 million users in it. And that's actually true every year, because remember, it's the intersection of everyone who's there each and every year. I saw a question flash up of what is incidence. Incidence is count, raw count. And so this is the number of users. Out of this 1.3 million users, 17,000 have the word wife. I think it's a lot easier, useful to talk about prevalence instead of incidence. This is a raw count, and this is a proportion, a percentage, if you want to think about it that way, but you got to do the math to convert it to a percentage. All right, let's look for using some dplyr or tidyverse syntax here to take a data frame. This is all of the tokens over our 6 years. Well, let's sample. And let's look at one token, football. So we can look at the prevalence over time for football. You can see it's trending downwards and we're bouncing around 75. So hopefully I've given you a sense of what the data looks like. I think it's pretty easy to work with once you know what the columns are, know what the values mean. Then you can go explore any token that you're interested in, or any set of tokens. And there's 15,000 tokens every year to play with. All right, so let's draw some pictures. We can visualize what's in the data. So let's very simply, naively look at the 5 tokens that make up LGBTQ. What are we looking at here? First of all, there's two facets. You've got your cross-sectional data on the left. This is using everybody that we've observed, even if we only observe them once. And you have your longitudinal data on the right. These are the subset of users where we demand we have observed their bio every single year. So we can look at real change over time. We can make real inferences about on net, is the prevalence increasing or decreasing? Not just how it appears today, but how it is. So all of these are increasing, and that's something that one of my students and I have a paper about, increasing over time. No matter if you look at it cross-sectionally as kind of representation in the active population, but also longitudinally. Those users who stick around and who are active, are they more likely to use an LGBTQ word to describe themselves over time? Yes, they are. So both of those things are true. What's this one? Looks like it's got some religion words and Trump words in it. So this is just the Jesus and Trump graph I was showing you before, with another couple of examples, Christian and MAGA thrown in for good measure. And I call this generally religious eclipse. Right? The religious words in general are flat to decreasing in their prevalence in US Twitter users' bios, and political words are increasing over time and being eclipsed. Prevalence on the y-axis here, years on the x-axis. Let me show you, this was what we saw on the website. This is the mom, dad, mother, father graph. Same graph, different colors, but just to show, right, it's the same data set that's powering the website, where you can do a little bit of exploring, then grab the full data set and go deeper into it, and you don't have to type into a web browser each time. And emoji support, it was initially poor, it's getting better. So we can look at the relative prevalence of different emoji within users' profile bios. So rainbow has increased quite a bit. It's top of everything here. People are reluctant to put eggplants in their bios. They like using fire, and this is hugging face. Yeah. Now this demo, it's part of what's up there on the Open Science Foundation website. You can use this demo and replace items in here as you like. Okay, that's everything I wanted to show you, and we have tons of time left, so I'm happy to talk about what's going on and run through some more examples if people would like. Trying to find the best way to look at the chat. All right, well, I'll do this in reverse order. Why are political words eclipsing religious words? One thing that should be clear is that this isn't going to tell you. Right? It just tells you that it is. Right? That this is the signal that it is. Everybody in this call has their own pet theory about why politics is the new religion of the USA, I'm guessing. The question is the population the USA? Yes. The country is inferred from the location of the profile. So people can type whatever they want. So they might be an IRA agent in Russia saying that they're from Springfield, Missouri. Right there, that will end up in the sample. We're just looking at the location text, and if it looks like a US location, then they end up in the sample. The data collection code is not on OSF. There's nothing special about it. It's a library. I think, yeah, I've been through all of them, so I don't know if it is TweetPy or Twitter-Python. It is one of the libraries that lets you talk to the Twitter API, and I use that. All right, so great questions about measurement. Is there a difference between Twitter users and the population? Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, Twitter accounts are not mandatory. Unfortunately, you're not forced to tweet every day. I would like for those things to be true. I would like for there to be a one-to-one match between people in the United States and Twitter accounts. But there isn't, obviously, right? There isn't a one-to-one match between people and Twitter accounts. Some people have multiple Twitter accounts. They have sock puppets that they talk to. They talk to themselves. Some accounts are bots, according to Elon. Right? Many of them are. Some accounts are companies, right? There's plenty of measurement noise in this method, but there's measurement noise in any social science method, and there's a ton of signal in this method. Right? So there's noise, but I put up with that because there's noise anyway that you want to measure what people do, human behavior, and there's just so much of it here, so much signal that we don't have to worry too much about the noise. You can do exotic things. In the past, I've matched Twitter accounts based on their name and location to voter files to say, if I'm Jason Jones in Stony Brook, New York on Twitter, I'm also Jason Jones in Stony Brook, New York in the New York voter file, which is public. And you can match across those two things. And maybe you have more real people, or maybe the Russian IRA goes into Twitter, into voter files and just uses those names to make their bots. So I can't solve the bot problem. Neither can the richest man in the world. I haven't done that. All right, limitation on how many bios can be scraped within one day. Yes, it's very high though. With a little bit of work and just essential access, whatever the lowest level that Twitter's calling it these days. With, if you have a Twitter account, in 5 minutes, you can get a developer account. With that set of keys, you can scrape 9 million accounts per day. So it can be a different 9 million over time, or you can have a nice panel of 9 million users that you're collecting each day. There's a question about, can you do better on locations than just kind of inferring their location based on their location string? And the answer is yes. If you want to pay for data, if you want to pay for the premium API, then Twitter will tell you where their users are. Or you can use the academic API, and you're just going to lose scale. You can't do it for everybody all the time. But you can get lat-long locations for users at different times. All right, are there tools like this one? So this tool, my tool, is specifically built to mimic Google Trends. Google Trends will tell you what are people searching for over time. And you see a lot of people, this is just kind of a quick go-to measure proxy for what people are interested in. And that's what I'm aiming for as well. Something like Google Trends. Google Ngram Viewer is also very similar to what I do. In Google Ngram Viewer, you can see for 200 years of published English texts, how frequently is each word used? And it's very similar to what I'm doing. I'm just focused on profiles and how people describe themselves. Here's a good question. Do you tokenize by hand? No. Break on spaces? Yes. And spell check? No. Right, so there will be misspellings. Let's see if we can find one. All right, this is how you're supposed to spell, definitely. A lot of people spell it with an A. Let's see if it's in there. It has to make the cut. Probably won't make the cut. Has to have a prevalence of greater than 1. Let's see. It's a common misspelling. I'm sure there are misspellings in here. There's no reason that there wouldn't be misspellings. You just have to make, the token just has to make the prevalence cutoff. Oops. Question is, do you have to choose tokens yourself? Yes, and so that is a feature, not a bug. Taking just kind of a data-driven approach here, tokenizing every single bio and calculating the prevalence for all of the tokens. So if there's a token that you're interested in, it's in there. If there's 10 tokens you're interested in, it's in there. If it's not in the data, it means that it's not in the top 15,000 most popular tokens. All right. Does anybody, if you want to put it in the chat, some list of words that you're interested in, we could look at the prevalence right now, the relative prevalence over time. Woke, liberal, and progressive. At what relative rates are people using these? Let's take a look. Liberal is red, it's the most popular. Progressive is green, following pretty much the same trajectory, maybe some trade-off here in the longitudinal sample where, I mean, it's definitely true that people are removing the word liberal from 2019 to 2020 and adding the word progressive on net. It doesn't mean it's the same people. It just means in the panel on net, people removed liberal and added progressive. Woke is relatively unpopular, less than 5 per 10,000. Interestingly, woke is one of the least durable words that I've observed in a bio. So you can think about how long, once you've put a word into your bio, does it stick around before you edit it out? And woke and entrepreneur are particularly effervescent words, right? They very quickly go away. Anything else that people are interested in? Doesn't have to be politics. It usually is politics, but it doesn't have to be. It could be anything. Activist, scholar, and organizer. Thank you. Let's take a look. What's the most popular? Activist among these three is the most popular way to describe oneself. 20 per 10,000 in the active population here. In the longitudinal sample, you can see it's higher. Right? People who stick around on Twitter, people who are unusually active on Twitter, right? They're active every single year. They're more likely to be activists than just your day-to-day Twitter user. More likely to be organizers and scholars as well. Right? The prevalence is higher on the right-hand side. So this is a nice example of how you can compare the cross-sectional group to the longitudinal group. I'll show you just, we can look at the numbers here that people very frequently describe themselves based on what they like. So fan, lover, and enthusiast are have very high relative frequency compared to their use in, say, texts over time. We got some great suggestions here. Now, there's a suggestion for gun owner. I'm gonna change that to guns or gun. Only unigrams, only single tokens in this iteration of the data. That will be improved in the future. Right? We'll be able to do bigrams and trigrams, right up to 5 grams. But for right now, because we're tokenizing at word boundaries and any white space, we just have single tokens and not tokens in a row. Later, we'll have that capability, but not in this round. There's one that dominates here. What is it? Okay, it's God. You can see the decrease here over time. And if we take God out so that it's not dominating the axis. Small numbers here, but definitely moving in different directions. Oops. Another set, designer and developer. Let's take a look. Feminism, we'll just include feminist here too for comparison. So designers used to be a bigger chunk of the active Twitter population, and that's decreasing over time. It could be due to many things. It could be people are no longer designers. Could be they're no longer describe themselves as designers, or it could be just new entrants are coming into Twitter. They're going into the denominator and they don't describe themselves as designers. It could be all those things. On a longitudinal basis, when you follow the same people over time, you can see you don't see this dramatic decrease. Mostly flat with maybe a little decrease here for designer. Developers, feminism. People are more likely to say feminist than feminism in their bios. You guys see this? I hope you've seen this. Yes, okay, good. Okay, question. Okay, so the question is, why not Facebook? Why not Instagram? I would much prefer to do this work on Facebook and Instagram. On Facebook, this self-description is there, but it wasn't there early. Most people don't have it filled out. Right? It's called the blurb on Facebook. And so the data is going to be kind of incomplete and biased towards later joiners of the platform. And they still don't encourage you to fill it in. So it's just not nearly as salient, the self-descriptive text on Facebook, than it is on Twitter, and the hoops are just too high. Right? We only have one life to live. Facebook is locked down now. I just can't. There's no way that I would get the kind of access that I have at Twitter to the Facebook data. So same thing with Instagram. I just heard horror stories about the API. If that's not true, either of those things are not true, please let me know. But if I were choosing a next target, I would choose Reddit. Reddit is adding user profiles very slowly, rolling it out. And one of the fields that you're encouraged to fill out is a bio. I'll show you mine just quickly. And Reddit data is very easy to come by. I don't know if you've used the push shift data, it's very good. User, hopefully I don't have anything too embarrassing in here. I don't know if you can see this over here. Yep. So here I am again, pictures, headline, and a different bio. Different bio than I have on Twitter. But and this is my next target. There's just still many, many more people that use Twitter than Reddit. On Reddit, you don't have to have a user account. You don't have to fill out this bio. And yeah, it's just fewer people do. It is probably a more biased sample than the Twitter sample is. All right, what else can I tell you about this? I hope you like it. I hope you use it. You can @ me on Twitter if you have questions about it. I will talk your ear off about Twitter bios, about self-descriptive texts. All right, so this seems like a good place to wrap up. This is my first talk back after having COVID last week, so I'm happy to jump off a little early here too. Like I said, best way to reach me, @ me on Twitter, and we can talk about this more in the future. Thank you.